So this research publication or summary report is around 25 pages. The name of it is the Cantilever Barn in Eastern Tennessee. It was published by Marian Moffett and Lawrence Wodehouse. It's a publication of the University of Tennessee School of Architecture. This was the first publication. Now, there is a larger book that is very difficult to find. I don't have one in my collection that is 148 to 150 pages. That is a very expensive book if you can find one. But I would definitely try to get this publication if you can find it anywhere. It gives you a tremendous advantage in how to build buildings with minimal amount of foundation work, minimal amount of materials, and you can do it all with hand tools. Now, I would like to reiterate, if this is a very good method to use in mountainous and hilly areas. If your slope was running like this. So today what we're going to do is talk about how you can get a maximum size building for the minimal labor and minimum amount of materials. And what that is a cantilevered building. Now, in Eastern Tennessee, in about 3 counties, there's a very large concentration of cantilevered barns. And what happens is they use log cabin cribs, and then they build a cantilevered structure on top of it. And what this does is provide you minimal area of footing that you have to level and dig. And it gives you the maximum amount of space in the second story that you can utilize. This technique used to be very common in Europe on buildings that were made 300 or 400 years ago. What they would do is have a single big story here, and then they would cantilever the next 2, 3, or 4 stories of the building. That way they can maximize the size of the building and minimize the amount of earthwork, foundation work they had to do. The other thing this does is if you have a hillside, you can cut 2 shelves, build 2 cribs, and put a building on top of it, and you don't have to level the work area. This could be super critical in SHTF. Or a homestead situation where you don't have heavy equipment or access to somebody that has heavy equipment. This you could dig by hand and build. And the size of these cribs are up to you. And they can be fully functioning buildings with stairs in them that you can get to the second story with. Or you can build a barn or workshop like this where you have an open second floor that you can store materials in. So this construction method is suitable for both barns, workshops, houses. The other characteristic of this, it gives you the maximum amount of overhang over the foundation so that it reduces rot and it reduces water infiltration. So in theory, if you had limited amount of treated material or railroad ties, you could do a direct contact foundation and you could have 15, 20 feet of overhang so no water gets to that material. That would do a lot to preserve it. Now, this book review of the Cantilevered Barn in East Kentucky, this was written by Marian Moffett and Lawrence Wodehouse. It was published under the University of Tennessee School of Architecture. This is the actual report. There's another publication that has 148 pages, and it has a lot of illustrated materials from actual barns. Those books are so rare, they're in the $300 or $400 range when you can find them. This publication, which is not too many pages, but it gives you a general gist, and it has a set of drawings for this particular barn. is probably in the $30 to $50 range if you can find one. Unfortunately, most academic projects that have true survival potential and would help the public are published in low numbers and they disappear. I have a lot of material like this, but it seems like it's never distributed to the public who could actually use it. Now on this page, it gives us a nice illustration of two very small cribs with a large amount of overhang suspended on top of it. When you're doing construction of this type, you're basically building a bridge support and putting a building on top of it. Now you can have various types of cribs. You can have one big crib and put a cantilever building on top. You can have a crib on each corner of the building and make a very large building. Depending on what you want to do, you can put two cribs on one side and one crib on the other. So you can build these any way you want. Now, we'll get into some of the interesting engineering that went into these by our forefathers, because the shape of these beams is very interesting and they give the maximum amount of lift and carrying capacity for minimal weight. This is page 2, and you can see here how this beam is actually shaped. And what they do is narrow the material at the edges. It's the thickest up top, but you can see the way these angles are made. They're designed specifically to keep the load carrying capacity of the beam while reducing its weight. Now, as far as cantilever construction, you can cantilever front and back, or you can cantilever all four sides. You can cantilever one side. On my old homestead, I built a workshop and I cantilevered 3 sides of that workshop. And what that did is that gave me a maximum amount of usable space for a minimal footing. That building has stood for, I guess, 32, 33 years. And this is the loft area. And you can have an accessible loft or a closed loft. It's up to you. But you can see this is very simple H-truss timber framing. And this is something anybody can do with basic tools. Now, the one thing I really like about this publication is they did some sketches and basic blueprints of this one building. And what you see here is the framing plan for the upper level, the long pieces here. And then these squares are the cribs made out of logs that everything is supported by. And then this particular barn is open in the middle, so you can stack hay, grain, whatever you want from underneath on both sides. Here is the side or frontal view, and these are your log cribs. This is your floor here. This is your opening where you can load materials up into the second story. You can have this open or closed. It's up to you. You can also put a trap door in there with a winch assembly where you can lift stuff up in there. My advice would be to make these big enough, the cribs, so they're usable space, and then put stairs in them so you can go up to the second floor. That gives you maximum utilization. The other thing these were used for is they're similar to bank barns from the Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland area, where the underside of the first story here can be utilized to store equipment. Back in the 1800s, since this was a high rainfall and bad weather area through most of the winter, a lot of times the cattle would stay under here during bad weather and they were sheltered. Now, if you ever want to so-called complete this bottom story, you could always come here and put small posts in around the perimeter and fill this in if you decide to do that later. And then here we have the end view where we're showing the crib And here you can see how these beams are shaped. So we're full thickness where the crib is, and then the bottom of the beam angles up. The top of the beam is level all the way across, giving you a good floor surface. Then we have another example. This is a 2-crib barn with a accessible loft. And what they did is what I talked about before. You can put posts on here and you can have cattle fencing, or you could actually build walls there and enclose this. Now, this is an example of the barns I saw in Pennsylvania, Northern Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia area. And this is cantilevered on only one side, and the rest of the barn is built into the side of the hill. This is called a bank barn. And a lot of people think this is where the idea for the crib barn came from. But as we go through this book and we look, there's a lot of really good photographic evidence of what was built years ago. This is another crib barn, and it has long cribs in here. So that would give you a lot of first floor usable space. This barn looks like it's somewhere in the 80 to 100 foot range. So you can actually build massive structures this way. Another interesting aspect of this book is it gives you a lot of details on the name of the barn, its location. It tells you what kind of notches are used in the logs. It tells you whether one side, two side, three side, or four sides are cantilevered. And it tells you how many cribs are used. So in this area of Tennessee, there's a lot of examples and a lot of variations. All these barns were hand built with basic tools. So if you have a good sized workforce, you could build with hand tools this kind of structure. And this example is an interesting structure. This was actually a fortified guardhouse that was built as a protective enclosure. And you can see here it had a stone bottom. It had a crib here, and then the blockhouse for the gun position was on top of it. So depending on the thickness of your logs, you could pretty much make this very bullet resistant up to a 50 caliber and use this as a guardhouse design. Now, one thing I would like to show you that is ultra critical in SHTF is if you have a sloped area, instead of digging all of this out to put a foundation under, you could make a building like this. And what you would do is with hand tools, you could cut out an area of maybe 12 by 12 or 12 by 16. Another one here. You can build log cribs up just like these. Build your barn, house, workshop, fort, whatever you're doing up on top of here. And you can put an entrance up here where you can actually go into it from upslope while having access from stairs here. This allows you to do the minimum amount of digging and foundation work on badly sloped areas and make a good size usable building with hand tools. This is a technique that's largely forgotten today. It's something you really should look into. Please share your thoughts. We'll see you on the next video.